And so to bring it all the way back around to Cyberpunk TCG, I'm trying to remain very realistic, not just to hype up Cyberpunk, because there is a lot of excitement for it right now. I want to be very specific about the things that are going to need to happen with this game that happen with every card game, right? Bans, limiting factors. As it stands right now in Cyberpunk, the only limitations for deck building are up to 2 colors, and then the RAM system, where your legends give you RAM, and then certain cards have a RAM limitation, right? Where it's 2 out of 3. And so by giving, and this is a very, very cool factor. I love it when games do this, where if you want to run something that's a little bit more well-rounded, you're giving up on the strongest cards from one color. And the strongest cards of one color are reserved for the monocolor decks. And so you don't have to worry about these hyper-efficient splashes if you know what you're doing. That's still going to become a thing. People are going to find out some nonsense. Mad Wheels and I were going back and forth with, yellow and blue having very strong splashable defensive options or card draw. I really, 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 really hope that they don't fall into the pitfall of blue draws cards, because that's what makes them unique. And it's like, you can't have the strength of one part of your game be such a generically good thing. And it seems like so many games fall into that, unfortunately. And it's Magic the Gathering brain. So many card designers have had or have some history with Magic the Gathering. And so the way that they understand and construct sets, the way they understand and construct abilities and mana curves and everything comes from Magic the Gathering. To get directly into Cyberpunk, to bring this finally all full circle, and we'll look at some of the more recent reveals for Cyberpunk. You can already see there's a couple cards here that you don't recognize, and these are also my first time seeing these cards. So, V Street Kid, it's a 4-cost legend that can go solo. This is interesting. When it's defeated, you trash the top 3 cards of your deck, then choose one Brain Dance program from your trash and add it to your hand. So having a low power, early, mid-game, like, go solo is kind of cool, right? The only go solos we had seen up to this point were around that same, like, 7-drop range. And so having one that's smaller, you can use this, like, spot removal, and then you get a card back from your trash. This will be really good in the mid game because you need to set up Brain Dances. And Brain Dance is a archetype. It's a what's the word for a tag? It's just like a tag on the card for a type of card. And right now, After Party at Lizzie's is the only Brain Dance program. And the programs are spells in this game. Single use, then they go away. And it specifically says Brain Dance program. Yes. So, we might get Brain Dance units or Brain Dance gear. Adjust a rival gig up to plus or minus 2. This is pretty cool, right? Then if a friendly gig has the same value, you draw a card. This costs 2. This seems weak at first. It's just pay 2 to draw a card, and you have to set this up. This will be easier to set up than it appears, especially later on in the game where there's multiple gig dice to choose from. But one of the biggest factors about this is the street cred system. The total of all of your gig dice becomes a number called street cred, and there's certain abilities that say this ability activates if you have X amount of street cred. And knowing these breakpoints for your opponent's archetype is going to be so important. And they need to keep designing cards around messing with your opponent's street cred or denying it. Being able to go for an early aggressive hit to take a gig from your opponent so that they take their, you deny that street cred. It's like a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, D20 are like the 6 different gig dice, and the D20 has to be the last gig dice that enters play. But outside of that rule, I think you can roll any other gig. And so there's people who are going to be reaching for like the D10 on turn 2 to try to high roll some sort of street cred ability, and you're going to want to try to get an aggressive opening to counter that line to deny some big turn 2, turn 3 street cred ability from proccing. And then cards like After Party at Lizzie's and other effects that modify gig dice values are going to be very important. And I think even without the card draw, this might be fine. As it stands, I don't see, V Street Kid plus Brain Dance programs being a thing. Trashing cards and then getting cards back is kind of cool. Cyberpunk is also situated like Riftbound, where they aren't making cards that search through your deck. You just look at top X, and then any cards you don't want, like, go to the bottom. It does save a lot of time, a lot of shuffling. It lets things flow a little bit better. And it maybe does reward deck building a little bit more, where you're building more around the variables and the ratios and the likelihood of hitting certain cards at certain times, rather than being able to tutor specifically for a certain card, blah, 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 and then getting a very consistent setup over and over and over again. And that's also a double-edged sword. Like, if you come from Pokemon and you're going to a game like this where you need to get a really solid hand and you don't, then you just kind of die. I prefer it look at X over search for X personally. I agree. I definitely agree. Being able to search for X, I like it when it is built into an engine that you need to set up, and then being able to search for things is your payoff, and not searching for things setting up your engine, if that makes sense. So there might be a world where you do get to search, but it will be something that happens like in the late game. That also has its own downsides, because being able to search for the thing you want in the late game means that you're consistently pulling your win con over and over. And this is a really big point that people hate about the Pokemon TCG, is there's a card called Boss's Orders. In the Pokemon TCG, you have your main Pokemon in the active spot, and it is your attacker and also your defender. Your opponent can only damage this Pokemon in the active spot, and the rest of the Pokemon that are on your bench are safe from damage. There are attacks that do damage bench Pokemon, and their strategies built around that, but generally, it's, if you knock out this Pokemon, I'll lose, so I'll retreat it to my bench and then put a different Pokemon in the active spot. And then that way I can buy myself some time and try to make a comeback. But Boss's Orders lets you play it, pick a Pokemon on your opponent's bench, bring it back up into the active spot, and then bow, you knock it out. And card that gets Boss's Orders, or being able to finagle your deck so that you can draw into Boss's Orders and get that as your win condition and it ends the game, has been a tradition for eons now. And very recently, as I do my famous card trick, where I find the card that I'm specifically looking for and talking about, Pokemon recently printed this card, Meowth EX, which has the ability Last Ditch Catch. When you play Meowth from your hand to the bench, you get to search your deck for a supporter card and add it to your hand. So now, you play Ultra Ball or something that lets you get Meowth into your hand, then you play Meowth, and then you get Boss's Orders, and then you're able to knock out the final Pokemon of your choosing to win the game. And so it just creates, once again, the same resolution of games. And here's the thing, right? Even the early, mid game, the back and forth, the ebb and flow of the game, all the decisions that have been made up to that point will feel so skillful and so good. But when the finale of the game is the same, it takes away the impact of the set, especially expanding on that and extrapolating that over the course of a couple years now. We were Ironically, we were wondering if Boss's Orders was not going to be reprinted and it would actually rotate out, but they actually reprinted it, so it remains in standard. And this was one of the similar points I had about Atrocity and Legends of Runeterra, is that there were so many different decks that all had the same win condition of Atrocity that it made the metagame feel more homogenized than it actually was. Because there's decks that are still doing the same interesting, unique things in the early mid game, and then they all culminate in that same Atrocity win con. And so you can see how the ability to search for a card from your deck, even as a thing you can only do in the late game, like if Meowth was somehow gated, like you can only use this ability when you're about to lose or when your opponent's about to win, like it would still create that same late game scenario over and over again. And I don't mind playing Pokemon on the Sims, so I don't have to do all the shuffling in person. And shuffling is a skill, right? There is a technique to make it fast and efficient to be able to shuffle. Having good sleeves is also a big part of that as well. But yeah, for casual players, newcomers, and again, the overall flow of the game, it does really, really help, especially if you want to play like a best of 3 during a Swiss round. In the Pokemon TCG, players there's a lot of urgency there because you play the card that lets you search. Players will shortcut where they plan on doing multiple searches. So they're going to do multiple searches anyway and then shuffle kind of once at the end. But there are certain decks and certain board states that result in I search for a card, then I have to shuffle, and then I play that card and it lets me get other cards, and then I search. The combination of draw and search means that your turn is broken up at several points by needing to shuffle your deck again. A skill I don't possess, lol. I mainly play Riftbound at the moment. And I definitely have to give credit where credit is due. Riftbound building their game design and their engine around that concept is very fresh yeah, we don't have any tutoring. That way there's less having to shuffle the deck. And you just look at top X and stuff naturally cycles back to the bottom. Same thing with like the rune cards as well, with the way they just kind of cycle back down. But anyway, to get back to Cyberpunk, this is just trash the top 3. Then, and listen, this is kind of nice, right? Where you trash the top 3 and then you get a brain dance, because you might have a brain dance in the top 3 and that just gives you a card back. This seems like it's going to be really bad at first, if I'm being perfectly honest, because you have to remember, you have to pay 2 to call a legend first. And you might not hit V at first. So this value as an early mid-game kind of puncher that you might be able to sneak in a hit to take a gig or knock out a key target that your opponent's trying to establish, you're going to be missing this timing a lot. I'm very curious what sort of reveal a legend or peek at a legend, and then you kind of know where to go from there to make sure you hit your calls. Next up, we've got Royce. That can go solo, and then it gets extra power for equipped gear. I think that this card is secretly kind of bad, because again, you pay to call, and then you have to pay to go solo. It has 6 base, which I think is a little bit underrate for going solo, but the extra power is nice. If there's mechanics where when you attack, this gear automatically equips it to something, or if there's a Maelstrom gear, something where you can get it onto Royce for free, then he becomes insane. But base level, I'm not really seeing the vision here. I think we already saw Arasaka, right? The first time a friendly Arasaka unit attacks each turn, you draw a card. Then if you have less than 20 street cred, discard 1 card from your hand to your trash. This seems just really solid in general, right? Again, you've got this kind of trash your hand synergy. So I am looking forward to the Arasaka discard synergy. I personally gravitate towards discard archetypes in card games because they add a very unique layer of skill expression. I don't want to be babied. I don't want them to print a bunch of cards that go, when I'm discarded, do this. You know what I mean? Because it just becomes very autopilot and it becomes really difficult to balance, because when you print a card with a downside to balance it, and then you print another card that turns that downside into an upside, the card inherently becomes overpowered. And then you have to balance the discard strategy around its maximum theoretical output. So then if you aren't high rolling, the deck feels really terrible to play. So that's another pitfall that you can accidentally design yourself into, is building decks that have really insane upper levels of power, but it's inconsistent, so it's fine. But then it's not fun for anybody because you're getting high rolled some of the time, and then if you're in the driver's seat of the deck and you aren't hitting these really big, cool dopamine highs of the deck, then you're like, what am I even playing this for? And I know you're typing lurk in the chat right now, Zabane. Stop it. Because lurk was skillful, I swear to God. Nobody will ever let me live it down. But we already are in agreement that lurk used to be balanced, and then it became way too strong, where the strength you got from just playing the deck, not necessarily knowing the deck or understanding it or playing it well, it just had a really insane floor. And then they gave it rally. Boo. Slop. They turned one of my favorite archetypes into rally slop. I can't believe they would do that. Look how they massacred my boy. Then Ruthless Lowlife. When a rival steals one or more friendly gigs, if this unit is spent, the value of those gigs becomes 1. Interesting. I'm not quite understanding the point of this card. Like, if you're playing red and you're swinging on your opponent a lot of units are going to be tapped, so you aren't going to be able to defend the counterattack. So what this does is it makes it so that when your opponent takes gigs from you, they aren't boosting their street cred. So it is kind of a way to extend the game, especially if we are properly anticipating that street cred is going to be a much more pronounced mechanic in Cyberpunk TCG. Because if you're playing an aggressive deck, you really don't care about the value of the gigs. You care about the number of gigs in play. And then theoretically, you get some sort of really ballistic turn where you steal a bunch of gigs from your opponent and you decimate their board so hard that they cannot get gigs back to stop you from winning. So that is kind of cool. And from what we know, when a gig is in play, its value can only be adjusted after it's been rolled into play by specific card effects. So there is a world, right, where you take your opponent's gig, and when they take that gig back, that gig is then reset to 1. So that also puts their game plan on the back foot. And I wonder if the devs are intentionally designing around this flow, where, as I said, because the base win con of Cyberpunk is inevitability based, whoever goes first has the inevitability. A deck that is built to go first and play hyper defensively and just win off of the inevitability needs to be designed against. Players need to have a reason to build a deck that can go first or go second, or build a deck that doesn't auto win when it goes first versus going second, and vice versa. That naturally occurs. There's nothing they can do to stop that from happening, but they can do their best to design decks that don't mind one or the other. Because if you have a game where you always want to go first, the first turn advantage is so insane, then whoever wins the opening coin flip to decide who goes first when you start the best of 3 is going to be at a big advantage, right? Because they win the first game. If they lose the second game, they get the option to choose first to go first in game 3, and it puts so much weight on being able to win game 1. And in the Pokemon TCG, we did have a few metagames where going first was really insane and going second was really insane. Um, and you can kind of attack the meta at a very oblique angle by saying, in this meta game, everybody wants to go second, and my deck wants to go first. So either I win the coin flip and choose to go first, or my opponent wins the coin flip and they choose to go second, meaning I get to go first, right? So you're getting a lot of value by being able to play your deck in the environment that you intend it for. We've just got this, a 5 for 3, no like just a big vanilla. This seems really insane. And this isn't even really a vanilla card when you think about it, because it is an Arasaka, so you still get value here with some synergy. This doesn't have defender or blocker or anything, so your opponent's still able to get around this if they want, but you can just slam this down and sit on it, because if your opponent attacks you, they have to tap their unit, and then you've got 5 power to crush whatever they try to play on you. So this is secretly a very defensive card. Next up, we've got Carry Uridine. The Last Rocker Boy. I don't know what Rocker Boys are. I'm not hyper familiar with Cyberpunk IP. Tap this card. I forget what their word for it. Exhaust? Exert? Rest? Every game has to use a different term than tap, but they all mean the same thing. Rocker Boy, Samurai. Are these placeholder arts? No. No, these are all the artworks for the card. There are a few cards that have alternate arts, but you can see there's a lot of different artists and art styles represented in the game. Some more realistic, some 3D rendered, some more comic booky, graphic novel-y, some more painted stuff. Definitely a wide variety here. They're going the Magic the Gathering route, and you're able to sort of, gravitate towards or pick or collect some of your favorite artists or your favorite art styles. Like, again, Emergency Atlas, I think, is probably one of my favorite cards right now in the game. I think it looks so good. It gives me a little bit of that Mobius vibe. But I mean, you could make every single card look like this, They're just opening up the chance for, like, even this is a very, very stylistic card, right? Sin City. This looked actually really cool. Jeffrey Allen Love. I'm not familiar with a lot of these names. I don't know how much crossover there is between Cyberpunk artists and Magic the Gathering artists or comic book artists. But those collaborations being kind of prepped ahead of time is also really cool. But like Legends of Runeterra, obviously, had a very, very cohesive art style. And that's by design. That's something that Riot really strives for. Even when it comes to like splash arts and stuff. Envar did Runeterra cards too. Ooh, cool. And there were certain artists that, even though you could tell it was a Runeterra card, you could also tell that it was from that artist, like Dowley, one of my favorite artists that did like a handful of cards. But this one is interesting. If you have a gig at max value, draw 2 cards. I feel like it's going to be very, very difficult to set this up. Especially for a red deck, the gig that's at max value most likely is maybe your D4. And then once you tap this to draw cards, then you can't defend that gig anymore, and your opponent's just going to take it from you. And, setting it up to where you get a couple of these in play, and then you draw 4 cards before your opponent, like, punishes you and takes it away, that could be something. Maybe there is it's not about drawing in the moment, it's about setting up a burst draw so that you can dig for a certain card or a certain finish or a certain synergy piece. Especially if you're combining this with gig dice manipulation, which you're going to have a little bit of, right? You roll that D4 and it comes up a 2. You're going to need to play Brain Dance. Where is it? This thing. This only lets you adjust a rival gig, so this isn't even as good. We'll have to continue to see the gig adjustment effects, because this card strikes me as very, very bad. This seems super hard to set up consistently, and You know, it's obviously understated because it has such an effective ability. If there perhaps is some sort of synergy with Rocker Boy as the tag where they get extra power, or whenever you play a Rocker Boy adjust a gig, if that's going to be a sub flavor of red, we might be able to get there. But as it stands right now, I'm not sold on this card. It looks like bait. Meredith Stout, Stone Cold Corpo. When a rival decreases the value of one or more friendly gigs, you may choose a card from your trash and add it to your hand. This is very good, but your opponent has to decrease the value of a gig, so they might not care about doing that. We have to see more street cred. Like we've already seen the Armored Minotaur, where if you have 12 street cred, this has an on play ability where it just defeats something automatically. So getting to a 12 street cred breakpoint, maybe playing Minotaur into Minotaur into Minotaur, is just backbreaking for the opponent, and you just win straight up. Because you have to remember, when you strike your opponent, you get a gig. But for every 10 power that a unit has, you steal an extra gig. So if you can get Armored Minotaur +1, then it strikes, you take 2 gigs. And I think that being able to strike and take 2 gigs is just monstrous. So there probably is a red strategy where you get Meredith Stout set up specifically to keep your opponent from trying to adjust the value of the gigs. Otherwise, you start getting like powerful programs or units back from your trash. And as we spoke, card draw is going to be very, very important in Cyberpunk because it is a game where cards from your hand have to be then burned, put face down, sold to become your resources to actually play cards. You don't naturally gain them every single turn automatically or from a side deck the way other card games operate, or the way that Riftbound operates, right? Your runes are all in a deck and you get 2 per turn. So you don't have to worry about removing cards from your hand in order to facilitate that. Right now, it's gear and programs can be sold, but units cannot be. And the cards that can be sold have the this symbol here. And the Mantis Blades is gear, which it says in the top right corner, and it's cyberware gear. And a lot of these we already saw from the starter deck. The Mantis Blades, this is just hyper efficient. I feel like we're going to be seeing this card all the time. Once again, I do love the concept of I can equip this to a unit to increase its power, or if I have 2 of these in my hand, I can sell one and then, facilitate my curve, go from there. And of course, Satori, the Sword of Soburo. If this unit wins a fight against a rival unit, you draw a card. Also going to be very strong. It seems that a lot of the card draw in the game is conditional. I'd have to, once we're done looking through this card pool, as it stands right now, all card draw seems to be conditional, which is so good, right? It's not just because if you print unconditional card draw, then any color or deck that has access to that card is just able to run a naturally more efficient deck. You're able to see your better cards more consistently, and you're able to have more options at any given time. Do you like the art on the cards? I think it's fine. I haven't seen a card where I'm like, oh my god, that's so ugly, what the hell? But I don't mind having stylized cards in my card games. You know what I mean? Like I said, I really love Emergency Atlas. I want to see this. I want to see Robert Semelin come back. Oh, it's over here. I want to see this artist do all the stuff. Love this art style. And I love the Lowlife. The Ruthless Lowlife. This card looks really cool to me. And I really hope that they do reprints and reskins, right? If like Lowlife becomes a staple card and then they have multiple artists like do their spin on the Ruthless Lowlife, then you get to run your favorite one. I love it when games do that. Pokemon does this as well, where there's multiple options of the same card available for you to run, usually at like a lower price point, and then like more collectible, more blingy, expensive, sexy cards. Actually, if I reach off screen here onto my magic pile of cards, the Meowth EX example I used from before, I actually have 2 different copies, right? These are the same card with 2 different arts, and I actually prefer this one. My green screen doesn't like it, but it's like yellow and gold and orangey in the background. It's Meowth with a bunch of coins. Yeah, so I mean, let me look real quick. What's the ugliest card? I don't like this card. This goes back to another sticking point I had, is that this isn't a unit. It's actually the pistol is the card. This is a gear card. And I wish that, actually, now that I'm looking, never mind. I was thinking that, like, you can see around the outside, there's like this computer microchip pattern around the border. I was like, oh wait, are they using that for gear so that you can differentiate them a little bit more? But I think it's specifically for this card because it's like a promo. I don't know how much they're going to be using assets from the Cyberpunk RPG. You know what I mean? Where they're just screenshots from the game. There was some card game that did that. Oh, like, you know, like One Piece does it, where the card doesn't have unique art. It's literally just like a cropped still from the anime, and it's like, come on, bruh. Like, come on. I think that they've gotten a lot better at doing that in the last few sets. I'm not overly familiar with One Piece, but whenever I see somebody post a picture of a card, or they're talking about a card, it does seem to be unique art and not just a crop of the anime. And sometimes that can be nostalgic, especially if it's a unit from like a really, really old episode of the anime. But anywho, where were we? Oh yeah, industrial assembly is a program, so it can be sold. Increase a friendly gig by 4. Then if you have 7 street cred, draw a card. This card does seem okay. Increasing a friendly gig by 4 does align with the Uridine. And so this is probably the combo you want to line up in the mid game. If you aren't under a lot of pressure, you play industrial assembly, raise up a gig by 4, draw a card by having 7 street cred, and then you pop 2 of these and draw 4 more cards. I believe the hand size limit is 9 in Cyberpunk TCG. I'll have to refresh my memory on some of the finer points of the rules, but this does look pretty legit. But as it stands, the Armored Minotaur, Industrial Assembly, and Arasaka are the street cred breakpoints. 7, 12, 20. I don't know if that's going to be shared across the board, if that's specifically for red, where all of their archetypes are going to be 7, 12, 20. It will be a little bit annoying at first to be like, red is 7, 12, 20. Yellow is 5, 14, 18. Green is 7, 10, 11. You know, it's going to be like, and you have to remember as well, you can steal a gig on your opponent's turn and then lower their street cred, but then at the start of their turn, they roll another gig dice into play, and usually the one that they're rolling is going to be a higher potential value of the one that you stole, so they'll just undo any sort of disruption you put into their street cred anyway. Like, this industrial assembly is probably going to be negligible to hit. In the early game, you aren't really going to need to draw cards all like that. So once you have like 3 gig dice, the ability to hit 7 is probably already there. If you have a D4, I have to crunch the numbers real quick. A D4 and a D6, the maximum value they can have is 10, but the lowest value they can have is 2. And so if you roll snake eyes, essentially, right, on the D4 and the D6, then industrial assembly still isn't going to be able to get you up to 7 street cred. So playing this on like turn 3, that means you get your third, your D12, no, your D10, and the chances of you hitting 7 street cred, you know, on your third turn, if your opponent doesn't take any gigs from you, is quite high. And so there probably is a world where if industrial assembly is just insane, where red just pops off with these as much as possible in the early parts of the game, then you need to be setting up to try to be very aggressive in the early game to stop your opponent from doing industrial assembly, carry, filling their hand with, you know, 5, 6, 7 cards, and then just swarming you or something. Because even if you have a lot of cards, you still have to sell things in order to build up your curve to actually be able to play the cards. But by drawing cards, you're more likely to hit gear. So it kind of works out. That's going to be another thing with deck building, is having enough things to sell. The same way you're building, the way you have to know how many lands you need in your deck. So this card is actually very strong. When I said that I like that all the card draw is conditional, this feels like card draw that the condition isn't real and that this is always going to be online most of the time when you need it. If you're getting your ass absolutely handed to you and you're trying to draw out of a bad spot, then you're probably cooked. But it's not like if you're that far behind, then the extra card you drew by paying 2 is probably not going to save you regardless. Getting over into yellow, we've got Dum Dum, Maelstrom Triggerman. He's a Ganger. Call. You may defeat a friendly gear. If you do, draw 4. Otherwise, draw 1. Interesting. So this is dangerous, right? Because call is when the legend is flipped face up. You spend 2 to call this. And so this seems very good in just a red-yellow. You clear your own Mantis Blades or something and to draw 4. But you have to be able to call him at the right moment. Because if you don't have any, if you're desperate and you have to go for a call because you're looking for something from your other legends like V, something aggressive, something to gain some tempo, and you get Dum Dum, you lose out on this draw effect and you kind of just lose on the spot, right? You have the gear in place, you call a legend, you don't get Dum Dum, and then your opponent defeats the unit that has the gear attached, and then you don't have any gear in play, so then you can't go for this to try to fish out. And kind of forcing your opponent to match you beat for beat of unit plus gear to defeat your gear and keep it out of play is going to be pretty big. So overall, I think that Dum Dum is actually quite bad. I feel like this is a little too hard to set up, and even popping a cheap gear could put you in a bad position where combat math starts to work against you. So even though you have a lot of cards, the potential tempo loss of your opponent being able to clear something easily and not lose one of their bodies could still put you behind. This does say otherwise draw 1 card, so I am being a bit harsh on this. You're always going to get at least 1 card, so it's not the end of the world. I think we do have gear that's like when this is defeated, then you gain some extra upside, and that's the other double dip of downside becomes extra upside. Next up is River Ward, Detective on the Hunt. That's, shout out to League of Legends, I guess, River Ward. Is River Ward, is that his name? It's a legend, so I guess his name is River Ward. But he's not like a ward of the river. This is a named unit. Call, draw a card. Interesting. So yellow seems to have a lot of card draw built in. When a unit attacks, you can tap this legend, choose a gear from your hand with a cost of 2 or less, and equip it for free to a friendly yellow unit with no equipped gears. This is strong. You get the card draw guaranteed, and then you can continuously get insane value off of this guy. We got to see what yellow gears there are, but that was kind of what I was talking about with the Uridyne. The ability to get gears attached to this so that it's a little bit more resilient, especially for free, is quite nice. But the unit has to attack. That is important. So I guess I'm overestimating this combo. It is kind of cool, however, because it's a sneakier play. If you have a unit and you equip a gear to it, or if you have the gear already on it, your opponent knows it's coming. Your opponent is not going to know the precise math. Like, are they going to have a gear to enhance this unit so that it's going to force them to play a little bit more defensive when you call River Ward, if that makes sense. We're going to calculate as TCG players the way we evaluate cards. We're going to say, okay, a 2-cost gear for it to be good has to give plus X power, right? For it to be good. Like the Satori is a 2-cost gear that gives +1, but then you draw cards. But Mantis Blades is a 1-cost gear that gives +2 with no additional effect. So I pray that we aren't going to have such a cut and dry evaluation metric for whether gear is good or not. I would always rather it be more granular like this. We got the double Resi, thanks to Zabaints. But I think this is still quite strong. especially again with Satori, you don't have to put this into play ahead of time where your opponent might be able to answer it before you get value out of it. Being able to just attack and then River Ward puts the Satori on a guy, and then you're able to draw that card immediately with your opponent having less counterplay makes this quite strong. And, it's just call, draw a card is just generically good. So shout out to River Ward. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this card going forward. And remind you, generally in card games, equipment is reserved for a specific archetype that's built around the equipment. Usually it's like, when I'm equipped, draw a card, or when I'm equipped, you get extra benefit, or your equipment is cheaper. Think of Jax or the Darkin from Legends of Runeterra. Archetypes that weren't built around the equipment, you weren't just running equipment for the sake of it most of the time. Because you pay for the unit and then you pay to equip it, and when your opponent defeats that unit, they get a 2-for-1. But the way this game is designed around gear, which is a very cyberpunk thing, right? Where it's people who are enhancing themselves with machinery and technology for various purposes, crime. So I like that they're saying we're going to build the equipment, which is generally a very overlooked and underwhelming mechanic in card games, and we're just going to fold that in with the curve system, right, where the gear can be a buff or it becomes your resource to play other cards. And then again, the concept of selling the gear on the black market is also very thematic. So that's something that the Cyberpunk TCG does very, very well. And I wouldn't be surprised if I feel like it would be really broken, and I would maybe even say antithetical to the design of the game if they were to make a gear that had no benefit except it had some additional effect when you sold it. And I think right now that is something they should never do. The upside of selling a gear or a program is to increase your curve. And that is already a very, very strong, important thing to do, and is a very important decision point to say, oh man, I really want to use the Mantis Blades, but instead I'm going to get rid of the Mantis Blades so I can make a stronger play or put another unit in play, etc., or something like that. Or I don't need this program right now. Do I want to be greedy and hold on to the industrial assembly because I want to draw a card later? Or do I want to try to play more cards out of my hand now and just trust that that's going to be enough to stabilize me, and then I'll just draw into whatever I need? Or is my board state in my hand so bad that it doesn't matter if I increase my curve, I need to draw a card and increase my options? Hopefully they stick to their guns there. In card games, you set up your mechanics, you set up your rules, your general expectations. They're limitations and design rules that you adopt as a creator, so that you have some guidelines on how things should be made and adjusted and how much they should cost, how things are balanced. And then as you get several sets deeper into your game, then you start to break those rules and shed those limitations, just for the sake of freshness, and of course for the sake of generating excitement, because you're inverting the player's expectations of, oh man, I can't believe they made this combination of keywords together that they never did before, or they gave this mechanic to a different part of the color pie that they never did before. And it's nightmares for balance, but in terms of freshness and excitement, which you need in your card game, that's an inevitability. So everything I'm saying, I'm glad they did X, I'm glad they did Y. I hope they don't do the opposite of this. It's cope. Eventually they will do that. Unless they are the true chosen card game designers of the century, and they actually stick to their own design rules, and they can subvert them in other ways. Because that's the thing. When you start subverting your own design and balance philosophy for the sake of freshness, you're inherently inviting insane amounts of power creep into your game. And there are arguments to be made that power creep is also an inevitability because, again, it's tied to doing things in your game that you haven't done before. Net also means that you're going to be doing stronger things, especially as an additional incentive for players to incorporate the new cards and new strategies rather than just updating the old strategies that they have been playing. You need to creep a little bit. This is one of those theories that it's a theory. It's like it's something that continues to prove itself over and over again, but depending on who you talk to, they might say that it's kind of a skill issue. And it's just it's a function of scope as well, where if you had a supercomputer that could actually calculate all the different extrapolated design implications of all the nonsense you're adding to your game, you maybe could still add fresh and balanced things. But to get back to yellow in the Cyberpunk TCG, wait a minute. This says flip, but the other legends say call. So I think that I have misevaluated this keyword because I forgot about this. Flip is when this specific legend is called, but call theoretically would proc multiple times as you call your other legends. So these are effects that you can activate multiple times per game, up to 3. And that makes these effects even stronger. Yeah, so Dum Dum is still bad, but not as bad as I thought it was. But that makes River Ward even more insane, because you just get to draw an extra 3 cards every game. But Victor Vector, search the top 5 cards of your deck for up to 2 gear that cost 2 or less, reveal them and add them to your hand. So we've already got some synergy here, right? Victor flips up, you get 2 gear in your hand. River Ward draws you a card. This is, if I have River Ward up already, and I would actually draw the card from River, and then Victor Vector flips up, and then I activate his effect. Right? The call would activate before the flip. That might be in the how to play section. Oh, deck out. The moment you have 0 cards left in your deck, your rival automatically wins. This is kind of crazy. Normally, it's when you have 0 cards and then you're forced to draw a card is when you lose. But the final card in your deck being a death card is kind of crazy. If both players complete a turn without taking a new gig from their fixer area, the game goes into overtime. In overtime, the moment you have the majority of gig dice, you win. The fixer area is just the out of play pile where your gig dice come from. And you can see that they're wording this in a more obscure way that's a little bit more future-proofed. I guess this does give them the room to ever, change the max number of gig dice or something like that. But I'm looking at tags. Yeah, so yeah, these are called tags. These little dividers here, the Merc and Corpo. Type, RAM, cost, cell tags, power. All right, flip. As soon as the card is flipped face up, the effect happens. It looks like they haven't updated this with call yet. They tell you when the effect happens. Call a legend. Each round, you can spend 2 eddies to flip a legend face up. You can do this once per turn in your play phase, or once per turn in the defensive step during your rival's attack. And so this is interesting. This is something that they didn't really explain in the initial gameplay they showed, but this is super important because calling a legend being a bit of a trap card, we haven't yet seen any legends that are a trap card. But, River Ward is call, draw a card. So you can actually call during when your opponent attacks you and draw a card, and the card you draw might give you some sort of out, which I did forget about. You can't go solo on defense. This is something you only do on your turn, where you take your legend from your back row and put it into play. Legends also are part of your mana curve. So you can tap legends to pay for stuff, or you tap them to use the ability on the card, or even you can tap a unit to go solo. So it pays for itself partially, and then it re-readies itself when it comes into play. Yeah, so the term that they use when you turn a card sideways is to spend it. Spent and ready. So I did forget about that mechanic. So that does make yellow looks insane then. Just these two legends together? Honestly, just one. River Ward seems like an insane splash. This cost here is called the RAM. Each legend gives you a number of RAM, okay? So like if you're running 2 legends, if you're running Victor and River, you have 4 yellow RAM. So you can run cards that are up to 4, right? So you get everything. This is only 1, this is only 2. You get to run Jack Wells because he's 3, but you can't run Atom Smasher because he's 5. So you have to run all yellow. You have to run mono yellow in order to get this guy. It's a 9-drop, 15 power, comes into play, wipes the board. Seems very ridiculous. I don't think there is any hard removal in this game outside of Armored Minotaur and then Atom Smasher. Well, we'll figure that out as we read the rest of the card pool, but right now hard removal is not real. There is it's blue, isn't it? Something that bounces back to hand, but it's like it only works on units that are weak. Above a certain power, it stops working. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Return a spent unit with cost 4 or less to its owner's hand. So actually dealing with this seems impossible with the current card pool. There's no like gang up mechanic where you can tap multiple attackers and then have them combine their power to take down one thing yet. Or is there? Am I misremembering? I'm pretty sure that's not the case. Spend your attacking unit. If your rival wants to call a legend or redirect the attack to a ready blocker, they can do it. Compare the total power of your unit. Yeah, it's just 1v1s. Units can't attack the turn they're played. If you placed a unit on the field this turn, you can still use its effects, but it can't attack until the next round. And only the defensive player can call. Yeah, so Atom Smasher just seems like an insane win con. Again, 15 power means that if it does attack your opponent directly, then you get 2 gigs. This can't attack the turn it comes into play, so your opponent does get a little bit of leeway to maybe try to keep putting blockers down to stop this. Or if it's a mirror, this is going to be really cringe. Because then it's, you play the first Atom Smasher in order to wipe the board, and then your opponent has to play theirs in order to deal with yours, and then you just go back and forth, and whoever doesn't have the Smasher gets smashed. But to read the cards again, Secondhand Bombus is a blocker, and this unit can't attack. This is only defensive. Hanako Arasaka, and this is a Arasaka unit, but with no power. Very, very interesting. And I'm not entirely sure. We'd have to check the rules. Because in some games, units with no attack can't attack, or units with no attack can attack, but if they connect with a 0 power, they don't deal any damage. So then the damage is not dealt. In some games, like the 0 counts, in some games the 0 doesn't count. Where, you know, the 0 attack might not matter for combat purposes, but for stealing, it might still count as an attack, right? Let me see if they have anything here in the combat regarding the combat step. No, just powerful card, powerful card. Even in the reading your cards section, there might be something in the Discord server if you really wanted to dig. But anyway, that does have implications for combat and design going forward. Units with 0 power aren't able to take down other units, right? Obviously. But if they're still able to attack, then they still theoretically could steal gigs. Or if there is gear or some other ability that procs when unit attacks, like the because this is an Arasaka, right? And if you wanted to proc Yorinobu, is a unit with 0 power still allowed to attack, even though it doesn't have any power? I imagine the answer would be yes. Like, it would be a bad idea, but you might be in a desperate spot, so you just have to sack the Hanako. It gives you options, I'm always in favor of having more options than less. I don't think there's currently any effects that lower attack. I think green has one card that lowers a unit's attack. Let me see. A unit's power, I should say. I should be using the correct terms here. But like lowering power in order to win combat is, of course, quite good. But if you reduce a unit's power to 0, is the attack just nullified in general? That wouldn't really make sense, right? So just based on the look and feel of the game, the design of the game, it does make sense that a unit with 0 power would still be able to attack. Reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, then choose a friendly gig. Add all cards with cost equal to that gig's value to your hand and trash the rest. This seems insane. This is one of those cards that if you build the deck around it, it becomes ludicrous. But we might need to, like, this is like very, very high rolly. This is going to be one of those cards where people are going to try to build around it, and you're going to be like, oh no, it's just way too high rolly. It's nonsense. Don't even worry about this card. It looks better than it actually is. This is totally cursed. And once we get more gig manipulation in the game, this is going to become insane. Literally, as soon as the stars align that you can consistently get this to proc, it's going to be over. Because this doesn't even tap itself. This just happens when it comes into play. And I guess it doesn't actually give you any, it's not a blocker. So you're just spending this to draw 4. You could build your deck in various ways to maximize on this. You know what I mean? Like 2 cost cards, 3 cost cards. Because Hinako also costs 3, this is most likely going to be built around some sort of deck where there's a lot of 3s in it. And that makes me scroll back and look at the other 3 drops, right? Like the Swordwise Hustle, which I said is actually a very powerful defensive card when you think about it. Yeah, you just stack your deck with tons of 3s and then you hit this Hanako. Because if you roll a 1 on your D4 and then you're able to use an effect that adjusts the gig +1 with its Brain Dance is only rival. As we move forward through the card pool, we'll see what other effects there are to adjust gig dice. Because right now, what we've seen is only decreasing rival gigs, adjusting rival gigs, but not your own. There is that blue legend, I think, that lets you do it. Let me see, where is he? Jackie Wells. The first time you play a blue unit or blue gear each turn, you may increase a friendly gig by 2. Yeah. So it's a Jackie Wells, like, crazy draw engine angle, potentially, where you roll a 1 on your D4, and then Jackie Wells sets it to 3, and then Hanako gives you all the 3 drops. It's not a plus or minus, though. This only increases, which is a little bit sad. So, like, for your D6, it gets a bit rough. And there is the world where your opponent has a 3-cost gig, and you steal that one in order to try to set this up for yourself. If your opponent has a gig dice with the value that you want, you don't have to do a bunch of finagling to get that value on your side. You steal that gig from your opponent, which is also kind of sick. The fact that they aren't printing a lot of self-gig dice manipulation effects means that stealing from the opponent becomes a much more pronounced mechanic in order to activate your synergies. And now that I'm fathoming this realization, that's so genius. Because if you had the ability to set your own gig dice to the proper values to activate all your synergies, the game just becomes either you strike your opponent early with tempo, or they proc some insane ability and then you get blown out of the water and buried in value. So it's kind of funny. I think the low life is low-key broken, where literally control in this game isn't just units, it's about lowering the overall number of street cred that is in play at any given time. So that Jackie Wells and Hanako do not happen. I sincerely believe the way I see this card is this will define the metagame once it's figured out, and then players will have to readjust their entire strategy about how they interact with gig dice in order to turn this card off. And then it will fade out of the meta because people get too good at playing around this so that you can never actually get it to work. And to be fair, there might be a mechanic of if X is in the trash, do Y, you know, or get this card from the trash. And you don't actually care about proccing this. You just care about milling the top 4 cards of your deck to activate some other effect. And 3 eddies to do so might be worth it in some scenarios. So this card has insane either meta-defining upside or just raw self-mill synergy built into the back end. This is, I feel like I'm coping. Whenever a card like seems better and better and better the longer you stare at it and the more you talk about it, it's an indication to me that it's cope, but this is probably my Babe Ruth shot that this card is secretly super duper broken. Because look at this. I'm just imagining this scenario of hitting 4 3-cost cards. You get another Hanako, you get a Swordwise Hustle. Yellow also has T-Bug, which is another 5 for 3. This is only 2 RAM, so you get access to this with only 1 yellow legend. You run River Ward, plus the Hanako package, the 3-beat. Am I cooking, chat? I haven't even looked at the rest of the card pool yet. That's gotta be something. In Alestrals, we had this deck called Fives, because having 5 power, it was just a insane just stat point that was so difficult for players to deal with efficiently that you just ran them down with a good stuff pile. And I feel like I'm cooking 3s somehow. Mad Wheels, welcome in. Yo, Mad Wheels. This card is broken, isn't it? I'm looking at some of the newer Cyberpunk reveals I haven't evaluated yet. And this card is actually insane, right? You get to look at the top 4 cards of your deck and then choose the gig? Wait. Oh my god, so you can actually have 2 different values and pick the one that gives you... This card is... Never mind. It's not even a question anymore. I read the card again, and then I read the card a 3rd time, and I read the card a 5th time, and I realized that this card is just bonkers. And I still am not sure if cards with 0 power are allowed to attack. Because there's a world where if your opponent doesn't have any blockers, Hanako could still steal something by being able to connect directly. We don't know if a unit has to connect with at least 1 power. That's the thing. Or if it's just an unblocked attack. Let's look again at the rules and see if we can suss this out. It's even better when we get stuff that interacts with the trash. The only thing that interacts with the trash that right now is V Street Kid I've seen, where you get the brain dance from your trash. Steal. When a unit lands an attack on your rival, steal 1 of their gigs. Spend your attacking unit. If it has an attack trigger, resolve that effect. If your rival wants to call a legend or redirect the attack, they can do it. Choose any die from your rival's gig area, move it to your own. Yeah, there's no caveats here. This is obviously simplified, but there doesn't seem to be any caveats here that the unit actually has to have an attack value in order to attack. But no, this card is insane. Here's my evaluation, Mad Wheels. You have a D3 or a D4 with a 3 on it, or your opponent does, and you steal it from them. And then you just pop Hanako and get 4 cards or 3 cards. And the other 3 drops in the game, either you draw a second Hanako, or you get Swordwise Hustle or T-Bug, which are just good-ass units to just shore up your defenses. and you go from there. I haven't even looked at blue 3s or green 3s yet. Sandevistan, you can't run this. Well, it would be green, green. It'd be green, green, yellow, which doesn't seem strong enough. And then for blue, blue actually only has Floret in 3s. Yeah, so I think it's yellow, red 3s. I'm so glad you can call legends on defense. Yeah, that was a mechanic that we didn't realize when they first revealed the gameplay, but it's in the handbook. Because going solo with a legend isn't possible defensively, but like River Ward draws a card when you call. And so if it calls itself on defense, you draw a card. And every time your opponent attacks you and you call a legend on defense, you draw a card. And what's great too is that leaving eddies open to call on your opponent's turn means you're accelerating your own legends very quickly. And then you just, re-ready everything once the turn comes back to you. And you're going to do that with 1 or 2 extra cards in your hand. So that's honestly super solid. Florid is so bad. We'll get there. Jackie Wells, this unit has +2 power for each of your friendly gigs. This is also, this card, I think you would actually run as a 1 of. This card is quite bad. On the surface, a 6 for 6 is just barely at rate when we compare it to like Go Solo and other stuff, especially if this gets uptraded, by something smaller with a gear. But you're going to have, actually, I take it back. This card is gross because you're going to have at least 1 or 2 gigs by the time this guy comes into play. So he's a 10. He's a 10er. And if he's able to swing and take 2 gigs, he pays for himself and becomes a 14. Your opponent can't remove this guy. I take it back. And just having a big guy means your opponent can't steal your gigs, yeah? It is definitely hard to say. But I think at very high levels of play, this is a unit that you run as a 1 of. Because this is the sort of card where if you're playing like I go first and play for defensive inevitability, this is the sort of card that facilitates that kind of strategy. And if you build your deck to where it can go first or it can go second, then Jackie Wells is a card that if you're going second, it's still a good beater and a threat that you can slam down. But if you're going first, it allows you to play it more defensively and rely on the go first inevitability as your main win condition. So I think this becomes like a 1 of in very, very high level yellow decks. Kuroshi Optics says, look at a friendly face down legend without revealing it. And this is just a +1 gear. The unit that it's equipped with has to attack in order to proc this. And this is fine. You're going to run this anyway in yellow because you need stuff to sell. And, depending on the stat breakpoints, having the +1 does matter. Then you attack, and then whether or not you have a chance of seeing River Ward or knowing 2 out of 3 where he might be. You can remove it with the quick play Cyber Psychosis, I think it's called. What, this thing. We haven't gotten there yet. There's a few here that I haven't seen yet. This is my first time looking at the newer reveals. Yeah, Optics is solid. Victor as well. They don't have to be yellow gears. So yellow-red looks insane because I think Satori, especially early, is going to be one of the better gears. Right? You've got Arasaka, and then you've got like Yorinobu, who lets your Arasaka units draw cards, and then this also draws you a card when they win the combat, or you can sell it. Like, right, Victor Vector, adding a couple cards to your hand that you can then sell is fine, especially if you have River Ward flipped first. I think call happens before flip, technically. So River Ward, you call him, you draw a card when you call River Ward, and then your other 2 legends, when you call them, you would also draw a card because of River Ward. Mandibular Upgrade gives blocker to a unit. This is also really strong, right? Like Mandibular Upgrade on Jackie. So then he's just a big guy that can defend. Again, the go first package. Gorilla Arms. The first time this unit steals a gig each turn, you may steal a rival gig with the same number of sides. This seems very good, but it's hard to get this additional upside. The +4 means that you can hit that 10 power breakpoint, and then you steal 2 gigs, and you intentionally steal the 2 gigs, that don't match. So this is like a comeback card where if your opponent stole your D4, you attack, you take their D6 and their D10, and then you also get your own D4 back. This seems like a sort of mechanic that your opponent would just intentionally not double up on the same size of die for a while, and then like they wouldn't fall into the gorilla arms. Or they try to fork you to where the gorilla arms don't actually matter. I wonder. Seems really expensive too. I think you could theoretically just run this as a one of and sell it early, and then once every however many games this comes through in the late game, and you get some insane Jackie Wells like steal 3 gigs type scenario and really swing the game. So this might be just a 1/1/1 package you squeeze into your deck. And that's what's really cool about the gear is if you draw them late, then those niche scenarios that they're potentially best for might present themselves. But if you draw them early, you just sell them. Now, After Party at Lizzie's is adjust a rival gig by up to +2 or -2. Then if a friendly gig has the same value, you draw a card. This might be more common to activate and draw the card than I realize. What's cool about this is that you adjust the rival gig up on the turn you plan to steal it. And when we reevaluate yellow, we don't see any street cred abilities out of them. They don't have a street cred breakpoint listed here in their card pool right now. So adjusting a rival gig and then stealing it in order to get a bunch of cred, I'm not sure how much that will actually matter. And then you already talked about this card, Cyberpsychosis. You may also play this program when a unit attacks by paying this card's cost and spending a friendly unit or face-up legend. So, quick hack, this is going to be a very important keyword, right? Now we're actually starting to see programs that we can play when the opponent attacks. Give an equipped unit +2 power this turn for each of its equipped gear, and then defeat the unit at the end of this turn. So you have to spend 1 unit or a face-up legend. That doesn't seem too difficult to set up, but I think it just makes it harder to play multiple of these. But certainly the idea would be you could, if somebody has like something with a gear attached to it, you psycho it, and then you redirect the attack to a blocker. It says you can play this program when a unit attacks. So I'm wondering if if you can psycho it and then also blocker it, or if you have to do one and then the other technically, or are they mutually exclusive because you miss your defensive step timing? Because it says call a rival or redirect to a blocker. So I'm wondering if Quick Hack is a third option here, and you can only choose one of those 3 options. Because if that's the case, then Cyberpsychosis is not really that strong, because if your opponent's attacking your face, you don't want to power their unit because they'll potentially get extra gigs out of it. If they're attacking something that's already expended, that's already spent, and the attack is already going into a body anyway, and you aren't losing gigs, then it's better to psycho it. So this is a card that's hard removal, but it's bad against people who are just mashing you in the face. How do you feel about the game having a set amount of turns that'll last, like Marvel Snap? I was talking about that, Big V. The game, because the person who goes first has built-in inevitability, the game becomes very defensive by nature, and I am worried that it makes going first too strong. But by making the game have a set amount of turns, it puts a higher emphasis on each decision mattering. So bad players are going to lose, and they're going to be like, oh man, like if only I'd gotten, it's going to be one of those things where making a mistake early will come to bite you in the ass later on in the game. You won't realize that you made a blunder early on that cost you the game. So it's going to be even harder to reflect on how you lost, if that makes sense. You can't artificially extend the game as a way to grind your opponent out or recover from a bad board state. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like, okay, well, I'm behind, so I'm just going to heal. I'm just going to play super defensively and just buy time until I draw my comeback cards, and then I'll figure it out as I go. If your opponent's ahead, especially if they went first, they have that double inevitability. It forces you to act. It forces you to take those calculated risks and go in, ironically. I feel like a game like this is being a futuristic game. It might have made more sense to be digital, but digital TCGs don't seem to last long. They said quick hacks were originally scheduled for set 2, but players said they wanted more interaction, so they moved it up, thankfully. Oh. Like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, like calling either they add quick hacks or they add some sort of reactive legend. But that's what I'm wondering. Do quick hacks take your defense step? Can I call a legend and then also quick hack? Because if I can quick hack and then blocker, Psychosis becomes a lot better. But if it's you have 3 options on your defense step and you have to pick one of them, then the spots where Cyber Psychosis is actually good are severely minimized. But I definitely agree that Cyberpunk being a digital TCG might happen in the future. We know that players are going to build a digital client regardless. It'll be in Tabletop Simulator or some sort of browser extension thing, because hardcore players are going to want to practice as much as possible, especially with all the remote testing groups and stuff we have in the modern era. They can figure out lines and whatnot. But Cyberpunk has also said through their Kickstarter that they want to also facilitate local game stores, organized play, local leagues, the lifeblood of a game, truly. But yeah, when you have the physical game and the digital TCG version of the game, you're tripling your empire. You know what I mean? Like, when you have just a physical card game, you'd have to worry about printing, designing, distribution, testing, running tournaments. You know, that's already a huge undertaking. And adding the digital client on top of that is a completely new pillar of resources. And both of those teams, all of those teams have to be in cahoots. They have to be communicating correctly. And you have to anticipate that the budget that you have can also support the digital side. Like we look at Pokemon TCG, where the digital client is really suffering, and we look at Magic the Gathering, where the digital client is its own weird thing because of licensing, where the Worlds Beyond sets that they print for Magic the Gathering, the physical card game, they don't have the same licensing rights for the digital game, and that creates a whole mess. But just in terms of bugs, even if you have a digital client, if it's buggy and doesn't work, then you might as well not have one. Or it actually happened in the Pokemon TCG, where the digital client, the digital ranked ladder, had a different format than the actual regional tournament play because of the upcoming rotation and like an upcoming set release that was actually delayed IRL. But digitally, you're allowed to implement those cards early for testing purposes, so players can test ahead of actually getting the physical product. But players wanted to practice on the old format, which was reflective of regional official circuit play. Like I say, even if Weird Co., CD Projekt Red never make a Cyberpunk TCG client, there will be some digital form to play and practice the game. And maybe down the road they do get there. Maybe it coincides with their first rotation. You know, if they end up doing a card rotation after a year of releases or 2 years. Cyberpunk, I believe during their messages on Kickstarter, they've already said that they're committing to less releases. The standard has been new TCG set like every 3 months. That's generally comes off pretty unsustainable for especially like a game that's just finding its footing, especially when you're considering like distribution and availability of product. If you release your first few sets too soon, then players are going to get left behind. They don't know what set to buy. They'll need cards from this set, cards from that set, card from that set, and it gets too convoluted. And also it's a factor of how the game starts off very simplified, it's not fully fleshed out yet. You intentionally don't release certain mechanics in order to keep the game in a more basic form so that it is easier for players to learn. So the game isn't super complex right away. You let people get used to it, find their footing, try it out, and then you start ticking on new mechanics and stuff on top of that. Players get better at evaluating cards and building decks as the set releases happen. And I think if you take a longer view and slow down your set releases every 4 months, every 5 months, then you can make those sets more impactful and more powerful. We see this in Pokemon TCG, where a set will release and they'll add only a handful of meta cards. But then there's other games like Sorcery, I think gets one set a year. And so the release of that set is a huge celebration for the community, and they can really take their time and see where the meta is, what the complaints are, what mechanics are players really jiving with and moving towards, and they really enjoy playing. The more you wait to add cards, you have a better idea of what cards your players actually want. The most hardcore players are going to play the best strategies, the strongest stuff, regardless. But your casual and intermediate players are going to be more excited about specific archetypes and support for their pet deck. You know what I mean? And I frankly am super glad that they decided to put Quick Hack in for the base set. And maybe this opens up a little bit where some of the set 2 cards actually do bleed into the base set, and it becomes a much more pronounced, larger set if they plan on letting that sit for 5 months or whatever, which is also a really good thing. Honestly, people tend to get very tired of base set formats because they're solved very quickly. And there isn't a lot of cards to pivot to or archetypes to try because they're incomplete. While this archetype will be good, but it's missing like this little bit of extra of a push that it needs. Or we've kind of figured out that based on the way the game is played, not just the meta game in terms of deck representation and the strength of cards, but the prevailing fashion of how the game is played. If every player is in agreement that going first is just insanely good because of the inevitability you get for gig dice, and playing a super defensive go first deck is the optimal way to play, then even if that's not necessarily the best way to play, if that's how the player base agrees that that's how the game should be played, and that's what everybody's building and how everybody is evaluating cards in the metagame, then there will be any deck and archetype that doesn't play around that idea will not be considered. Do you get what I mean? Sometimes it's like, oh, we didn't realize that this card combination was really strong, and so players found it, built a deck around it, and it ran away with the metagame, and nobody had any idea when these cards were being made. And, you know, that's like a balancing oversight. And sometimes there's just, it's just a meta oversight where when the dust settles, it ends up in this really strange area that nobody accounted for, where, oh, because playing for the inevitability win con is so strong, then we play super defensively, then everybody stops running early game. Everybody just tries to go for like a really big haymaker in the mid-late game to try to get a really big advantage and close out. And suddenly we get just a completely ridiculous metagame where everybody's playing super greedy, that does open up room for maybe a hyper aggressive or a tempo oriented deck to come in. But if the prevailing wisdom is that these aggressive decks are just bad on their face until we get more support in the next set, then players are going to be less likely to explore that angle on a massive scale. We'll have to see. So, this is obviously not the entire card pool. This is only 46 cards. And a base set is usually like 100, and a good sized base set is like 130 cards, right? There's been a few releases where the base set has been very small, like Runeterra's base set, I think was just barely 100 cards. Or was it less than that? But one of the biggest factors, I think, of a base set format getting really overconsumpted by one archetype is usually when that archetype, that color combination, that piece of the color pie has access to a mechanic that everybody else doesn't. And because they have a monopoly on that, if that mechanic is good, then it's beat 'em or join 'em. That's all it becomes, is beat 'em or join 'em. Usually this is interaction or card draw, negation, these incredibly powerful and potent mechanics that define card games, but are only given to a certain deck. Runeterra had many issues set 1, and size was one of them. Yeah. And it's not like entirely new archetypes have to show up on the scene, but the card you add to the game just has to create churn. That's all it is. When your new set comes out, it doesn't have to make your old archetypes become obsolete or bad. It just needs to give enough footing to other archetypes and new archetypes that they can actually compete and cause that churn in the meta. If you're a Dragapult player, a Gardevoir player, and you just bring that deck to every tournament and you're enjoying yourself, that's great. But as long as other archetypes get the tools to actually fight you and they aren't auto losing, because that's another really big thing. It wasn't just that Gardevoir was strong, it was also really gatekeepy. Dragapult was also really gatekeepy, where it's like, yeah, this deck actually has a really strong matchup against Gardevoir, but it gets annihilated by Dragapult. Or this deck can stand up to Dragapult in other decks, but auto loses to Gardevoir. And it's like that in a lot of other card games, and it happened over and over again in Runeterra. Which, I'm not saying that you need to have a chance into every single matchup, but when one of the most popular decks in the game is running interference for the best deck in the game, it's just unfortunate. It's an unfortunate design thing that happens that you can't truly predict unless you're curating the metagame very, very intensely, which is also kind of bad. And this is another major hurdle that Cyberpunk has to overcome, is if they're going to put a big delay between the release of the base set and the release of the next set, they have to be careful that there's not some ridiculously overly dominant archetype. I don't think it's possible to avoid that. Truly. I don't think it's possible to avoid that. There's just physically not enough cards in the game. They'd have to make every single card in the base set good or part of a realized archetype. You have to have very little fat in your base set. And from a game design philosophy, from a perspective where so there's like hardcore game design where you make a card game because every card has a purpose, every piece in its place, every deck is a deck, okay? And then there's that whimsical, creative side of game design where you're evaluating the card game as a hobby, as something that people are going to be spending a lot of time with and experiencing it as it changes and grows over the course of years and years, okay? And so you sprinkle in cards that are like, oh, this card is not really that good. It doesn't really have a place, but it's kind of cool. this card is bad, but it's a fan favorite because it's bad, or it has like really cool art. And then, in the next set, it gets a little bit more support. In the next set, it gets a little bit more support. You're leaving like this trail of breadcrumbs. And then finally, great rejoicing is had across the land when Gorilla Arms becomes an insane deck, and you have like Gorilla Commando, and I mean, like that sort of like long-term payoff. And I think for your base set environment, players are always going to gravitate towards their favorite characters, their favorite cards, their favorite archetypes, their favorite mechanics, regardless of whether or not you design for them. I think it is best, and this would probably be a very contentious point, to design for the overall balance and health of your game at its foundation, and all of the fan service that happens thereafter as you expand your game just kind of happens naturally as people get attached to your game and its characters and its world. Right? Like in Magic the Gathering, it's happened a few times where fan favorite cards get reprinted or make cameos in the background of other cards. Like there's some little green guy or something that's like everybody's favorite Blorbo in Magic the Gathering. And if you have a solid foundation, then it means that players are able to get in and play your game the way that they want. That is also a really bad thing to happen in the base set, where people who are a little bit late to the party want to get into your game and they say, oh, cool, I want to play this deck. And then everybody's like, no, do not waste your time or money or energy playing that. Get these cards instead. Only yellow is good. Everything else is trash. I remember specifically when Dragon Ball Fusion World came out, green was far and away the best, and everything else was dog shit in comparison. I'm gonna say it, the Cyberpunk alpha kit sucked. Yeah, the alpha kits would be better as like demo kits, right? Like those are the sorts of decks that you play at your local game store and teach people at a convention. Like, this is how you play. And like they give you the most basic deck that has no sauce whatsoever. Like those are like tutorial kits. But anyway, to get back to evaluating the cards themselves that are in front of us. Reboot Optics. Give a friendly unit +4 power this turn. Defeated at the end of the turn. And this is a program, so this is like really interesting. What I do like about Reboot Optics is that your opponent can't negate this. And there currently isn't a mechanic where you can reboot Optics and then they tap your guy. So then like you don't get your attack and then it just dies automatically, which always feels bad. But I will also say that whenever you make a cheap, big buff that kills the unit at the end of the turn, it's a recipe for something really overpowered. I don't think it'll really matter, though. I think based on the current card pool, Reboot Optics is kind of just a removal spell where you sack a unit in order to crash into something that's pretty big mid-size. Run 2 copies of this in your deck, draw 1 early, you sell it, and then the second one you use as your removal, right? So that way you're able to smack something really dangerous in the mid-game, really troublesome. I just want an online card game because I'm broke and also because there will never be anyone to play with around me. But maybe I should want a job instead. That is important as well, where a digital card game helps with players in rural areas. Again, the casuals that like the game, like the IP, but they don't have the funds to get into the game, or they want to try it before they commit. I want to practice this deck and learn this deck, and then when I buy cards, I want to buy the cards to build my favorite deck, IRL, and then I'll maybe play that at a tournament or something down the road, but that's not necessarily the thing. And for digital, it's a lot better for content creators. You know how it is. If you have your digital game with replays or whatever, I'm recording stream footage, it's a very rote method of content creation at this point. I agree that the digital client advertises for the physical game, but we already saw Goro. He's the go solo. Now, he's pretty cheap, right? 5 for 7. is very solid, and he's a blocker. So he can be aggressive with go solo or defensive as a blocker. You can call a legend, but you can't go solo on reaction. But I could definitely see green decks that want to get Goro in play very early, and they have this great defensive wall. This is another I went first mechanic, right? You running green, yellow with Kuroshi optics to figure out where Goro is and then call him immediately. You've just got this big guy that your opponent can't really get around. They have to try to swarm to get around him. And as I said, depending on the vogue, the fashion of how the game is played and how decks are constructed, maybe you can't get around Goro. Call ready this legend. When a rival unit attacks, if you have a pair of same-sided gigs, give a friendly unit with cost 4 or less, +1 power and blocker this turn. This is very hard to evaluate. A pair of same-sided gigs means you have to have stolen one from your opponent. And then you defend what you stole. So green seems to be building around this really defensive, take 1 gig and hold it for dear life archetype. You have to run one or the other, right? As a legend, you can't have both. Hands Unclean is definitely more versatile. But I think that this one is insane if with the right build. Like, obviously, this requires a lot more synergy to work. Because this, like, call ready this legend, you know, you're paying 2 to restand this. And then you can spend Goro when a rival unit attacks in order to redirect the attack. But you have to have the pair of same-sided gigs first. So it's like this wants to be in a defensive deck, but is a defensive deck going to have the cojones to be able to steal an early gig? You know, grab a D4 or whatever, or a D6 and then hold it. And +1 power and blocker might not be relevant. So it's my gut's telling me this card is bad, but I want to give it the benefit of the doubt. Next, we've got Panem Palmer, Nomad Cavalry. Call ready this legend. When a friendly unit attacks, spend to choose a gear from this legend and equip it to that unit. If you do, ready that unit. A gear from this legend. I don't get how this card works. Choose a gear from this legend and equip it to that unit. Basically, it's like XZ's material where you're taking gear and you're stashing it underneath the called legend to use it and distribute it later. But I'm not sure mechanically how that works, because I was under the impression that a legend, you know, could only come into play from the Eddy zone or whatever if you go solo. You're just equipping it to a unit? Because it says equip to a unit or face-up legend. Yeah. So you equip that, you still pay the cost and equip the... Because it doesn't say the legend has to be in play. You just equip it. And it just doesn't do anything. Okay. I see now. You just equip it, and then she redistributes it. Yeah, so essentially she lets you double attack. Or attack with something and then re-ready it so that it can't be attacked. Your Arasaka units have +1 power when attacking. This seems to just be a green-red card where you have like the double Arasaka +2 deck. But outside of that, this is like just way too bland. Corpo Security just being a solid 2-for-2 blocker seems perfectly fine as well. A 4-for-7, shout out to Emergency Atlas. Then there's Goro Takamura. This unit has +1 power during your turn for each face-up legend in your legends area. Seems like a solid 1 of. You don't really want to see this super early. Maybe a 2 of. Like a heavier mid-range deck where you're able to, you know, you invest in calling all of your legends, then suddenly you play an 8-for-4. So definitely in a heavier deck, Goro does kind of come through. Riding Nomad. This unit can attack spent rival units the turn it's played. This is amazing, I think. Like, this has such strong tempo built into it. It's essentially a removal spell. A 6 for 6. I might play green-yellow. I am really curious about, like, yellow-red. Like, the Hanako yellow-red 3s. We'll have to see. If there's enough good 3s, I think that yellow-red 3s. Which color is Ionia? It's blue, I believe, has the bouncing and negating. We'll get there. We're almost there. Sandevistan. This unit can attack spent units this turn, right? And, like, this is also, like, tempo. And you have to run 2 green legends to get the Sandevistan and the Riding Nomad. But I guess it's like you can run 2 Riding Nomad and probably 2 Sandevistan, or like a 3-2. Is there a release date already? First wave begins Q3 2026. So this is where the first wave of Kickstarter rewards will be going out. And then the second wave is Q4. So end of this year. But that's just Kickstarter rewards. That doesn't necessarily mean the game is out. The game, you know, probably won't technically be out until the local distribution gets up and running and local game stores are actually carrying the product. But up until that point, if you are a Kickstarter backer, you're going to have decks, you're going to have cards, so you can build and play and share the game with your friends and all that. Corporate Surveillance. Spend a rival unit with cost 3 or less. This card seems really good. This seems like an insane card. Nice and cheap, useful offensively, and kind of defensively, right? Where if your opponent has something really cringe in play, you spend it so you can attack it, or you spend their blocker so they can't attack, they can't stop your attack. So, like, green-red Corporate Surveillance just seems monstrous in terms of being able to get some tempo. And maybe that's the scheme. Corporate Surveillance, so that way you can get an early gig to activate Goro Takamura. I guess it depends if it's red green or if it's green red. Yeah, I think it's green red. But finally getting to blue, we've got V Corporate Exile, an 8 for 5, go solo. Crazy. I'm gonna see if I can break Victor Panem, basically, especially since we just talked about it. There's got to be something there where Victor gets you a ton of gear. I like River Ward, seems amazing. Just straight up, if you're running yellow, just having River Ward. Because just the call, draw a card, just gives you a little bit of a drip of resources without having to really do much. And this is when a unit attacks. Equip it to a friendly yellow unit with no equipped gear. And so this is friendly and enemy, so this just gives you a lot of utility for offense and defense. I think River Ward is just so insanely just versatile. And you're going to be running a lot of really solid gear regardless. We have to see if green gets any cheap gear. The only green gear we know is the Sandevistan. And yellow only has Kuroshi Optics. Mandibular Upgrade is also kind of lit, because being able to use River Ward to put Mandibular Upgrade on something to give it blocker and then redirect the attack is just going to be so hard to get over. And the threat of River Ward means your opponent can't swing on you, right? They don't know if you've got Mandibular Upgrade. To be fair, Mandibular Upgrade only gives blocker. It doesn't give any stats. Yeah, you in Cyber Psychosis is 2, like Hanako for 2. When you roll that first D4 and it hits a 2, you're going to be cooking so hard. And with my deck, I roll that first D4 and I hit a 3, I'm cooking. Or if I roll my D6 and I hit a 3, I'm cooking. If my opponent hits a 3, I'm stealing that gig and then I'm cooking. Which is probably a little bit better for me, because this is more of a mid-game play where I just draw 3 or draw 4 or whatever. Alt Cunningham, Soul Killer Architect. Wow, that's a really sick name. It's a 4 power for 6 that can go solo. When this legend steals a gig, you remove this legend from the game. If you do, choose a program from your trash and play it for free. This is exactly the sort of card that's going to be really bad until it's not. We broke the game and it's not even out. When I saw this card, I was thinking to myself initially that like, oh yeah, you know, this is the sort of card that people are going to try to build around at first, but aren't going to be able to quite make it work. And then they're going to like put it down. And then later down the road, something else will come out and make it broken. But this card, I kept reading it over and over and over again. And the deeper I thought about the way this effect works, broken. This card is insane. Again, the fact you get to look at the cards and then choose the gig, like, actually insane. You can literally just do this like turn 1 or turn 2. If you're off to a really bad bricky start, you're like, well, you're going to be fishing for cheap cards anyway, right? And if it's like you rolled a 1 on your D4 gig dice when you first started the game, you're at least going to be fishing for mantis blades or like other cheap 1-drops. 2 is the sweet spot. If you have a 2 and a 3, then I think that's the sweet spot. 2 and 3. Based on what we're seeing right now currently. But even 1, you know, you're fishing for optics or mantis blades so that you can start selling them and getting off of the field. There's a reason it's a 0/0. Exactly. My question is that even though it has 0 power, is it still technically allowed to attack? Is it still allowed to attack? And B, does it have to attack with at least 1 power for it to be able to steal? Because those are 2 separate questions, technically. Because there's a world where I still want to attack with this, even if I know it's not going to deal any damage. Some games, units with no attack can't attack. And if I'm able to attack, I'm able to activate some on-attack effects like River Ward or Arasaka Synergy. And if it can steal gigs, then it doesn't matter that it has 0 power. I would have to assume, for balance purposes, that a unit has to strike an undefended attack with at least 1 power for it to steal the gig. But I haven't seen that actually confirmed anywhere. But getting back to blue, I don't think we have any super expensive programs. But yeah, Alt Cunningham, this is exactly the sort of nonsense like gimmick deck that either doesn't work in the base set or only works like a 10th of the time and people just run it for shits and giggles. And then in like set 4, it becomes absolutely insane because they add like Feel the Rush to the game. And then you run some sort of nonsense with Victor. You run Victor, Hanako, so that you can just trash a ton of cards from the top of your deck. Actually, no, this puts the cards at the bottom. This doesn't trash the excess. So it's Hanako, whatever we have, whatever we can to trash. And then you go solo with this in the mid game. And if your opponent like is not prepared, they get bodied by some really expensive program. You know what I mean? Like, this is exactly the sort of thing you do to like cheese out something like Feel the Rush or something like the Harrowing in the mid game and your opponent dies straight up. Something like War Mother's Call and you're getting Goro in play, or like Armored Minotaur in play, or Atom Smasher in play for cheap somehow. Like if there's a 10 cost program that allows you to revive the strongest unit from your trash, and you can get Atom Smasher in that program in your trash and then cast it for free with Alt Cunningham, it's so cheesy. Next up is Evelyn Parker, Beautiful Enigma. She's a doll. Those are my kind of decks. That's the thing too, is that like with proper deck building, you make that outside chance as consistent as possible. And because this is just one legend, your other two legends are just the backbone of some secondary strategy. And the best part too is like, if it's in the late game, you just play that program naturally with your curve, right? And then you do the Alt Cunningham play, and because you played that program from your hand, it's in the trash. And so then she plays it a second time. She echoes it. Have we seen counter spells or no? No. There's currently nothing that stops programs from working. Oh shit, here he is. You may discard a program from your hand. Never mind. There's the fucking deck right there. Now all we need is a reason to run some really ridiculous, expensive program, and then you run Placid Cunningham, and then that's all she wrote. He is 8 cost, so I'm not entirely sure how you get him into play. But maybe it's a late game over synergy archetype, where you have several really expensive programs, and then Alt doubles the one you need for the matchup. I could see that being the idea. Rather than Alt Cunningham being I try to play this really expensive thing super aggressively in the mid game and cheese you, and it's my deck has 3 different super expensive programs. This is for this matchup, this is for that matchup, this is for that matchup. And then Placide gets the win con into the discard, and then Alt doubles it for whichever matchup you need. That's tight. That actually is less cheesy and is a little bit more based in big brain. I would actually respect that archetype. It's crazy how you can just read a couple cards and extrapolate entire decks. Call. Decrease a rival's gig value by 3. Search the top 3 cards of your deck for up to 1 Brain Dance program and add it to your hand. Bottom deck the rest. Now, there's only 1 Brain Dance program, and that's the After Party at Lizzie's, where you can adjust a rival gig and then draw a card. So I imagine there's going to be obviously more Brain Dances. This is one of those things where I talked about they aren't necessarily going to be all in the base set. There might be 1 or 2 Brain Dances, and then in set 1, in set 2, in set 3, they add more and more and more, and then this sort of Brain Dance archetype comes back where you're able to play spells, recover them, play them again, and you just have tons of value while drawing cards and also lowering your opponent's street cred. I said, based on what I saw in red, that in order for aggressive decks to work, they also have to reduce the value of the gig dice so that their opponent isn't able to activate big street cred synergies to get additional payoffs. Because, again, I have to emphasize this, we haven't seen enough street cred synergy. I suspect that's going to be a massive, massive factor in the game, especially the more cards are printed, the more street cred is printed. But if your opponent's high rolling, then you either have to attack them to take that gig away, or you have to start hitting After Party at Lizzie's. You have to start hitting Evelyn Parker. And that also means that archetypes that alter gig value becomes meta dependent. In the early game, in the early days of the game's existence, based on what we're seeing now, if there's not any street cred mechanics, messing with gig value doesn't matter too much. Because I think that like mono red cred, being able to drop like 2 armored minotaurs back to back and just run your opponent down, and playing this into blue disruption would be so bad. Unit or blue gear each turn. You may increase a friendly gig by 2. Then if it's at max value, draw a card. So this is pretty strong as well. So Mad Wheels, didn't you already tell me that you can't choose the same die over and over again? That's already maxed. You have to be able to increase the value of the die for the next part to activate it because it says then. So there is there's some interesting plays there. So this is Lucy overclocking. It looks like this is just for collection purposes. She doesn't actually do anything, which is cool. This is low-key kind of gas, right? Where this is literally a promo card. It doesn't do anything. You can run it for swag, but it doesn't actually have an effect. So it's literally just a collector's item. And it also means that they don't have to reprint Lucy, where you have the promo version and then the playable version. And you don't have accidentally make Lucy a playable card that nobody can find because it was a Kickstarter promo and you have to pay $6,000 for it. So I gotta give a quick round of applause for Lucy just being a cool card to look at. And so this is Evelyn Parker, again, non-legend version. When a rival steals one or more of your friendly gigs, if this unit is spent, draw a card. This I kind of like because I think you could play like a no guard style. I'm thinking of this with like Alt Cunningham, right? You play no guard Parker and you intentionally like just spend these. I guess you send these in after your opponent's units are spent. You spend Evelyn Parker's, steal like 2 or 3 gig dice. Your opponent goes in and they have to attack these while they're spent rather than taking the gigs back. Because if they take the gigs back to equalize the position, you're drawing cards, okay? And so these are actually really aggressive cards. Where if you're running like a swarmy deck, all you need is one big attacker that maybe takes out the blocker first. And then the Evelyns go in, they sneak out a couple gigs, and then your opponent's disincentivized to equalize that position. And if they do, you're drawing cards. So you're actually playing towards finding some stronger outs and bullying them further. There's probably like a red-blue low-life type of deck, right? You have like Swordwise Hustle runs in first to your opponent has to tap a blocker in order to keep this from hitting them in the face and taking a gig. And then Evelyn goes in after your opponent is out of blockers to take gigs. That's the idea, is that this incentivizes your opponent to attack them rather than attacking their face to get the gigs back. But I do agree that the board states where you're able to pull that off is probably going to be really rare. So if you're running blue-red, low life is also a 1 for 2. We need some more cheap units. They'll be okay with like Mantis Blades and stuff. But it's hard to say if we're going to have a Red Rush variant. You know what I mean? Yorinobu drawing cards when Arasakas attack. You're fishing really hard to get Mantis Blades to buff up your weenies. Or Satori to keep giving you draw to find more cheapos. There's definitely shades there. The specific weird board state where you take gigs and then your opponent has to either take the gigs back and you get cards, or they knock these out to deny your cards and you keep the gigs, is a really nasty fork. Delmain Cab being a 4 for 7. I kind of called there being a vehicle archetype. Something with Floret might be hilarious. Flathead we already saw before. If you have 7 street cred, 7 or more, this unit can't be blocked. There's probably going to be some really, really specific, rather than 7 or more, but like a really, really specific number that if you're able to set it up precisely, you get some even stronger benefit. And that's me being a memer, where it's difficult to set up, but with a good payoff. So Blacid, when you play him and when you attack, you may discard a program from your hand. If you do, bottom deck a rival unit. Just so gross. 8-drop that just removes 2 guys. Yo, what's up for Necro? I'm doing great. I've been Really excited for a bunch of stuff coming up. Cyberpunk, Maple Story, Pokemon Champions. This should be digital rather than physical, in my opinion. I agree for Necro. I think it definitely could be both, but we understand how much goes into having a really strong and robust digital client alongside your physical game. Now that Cyberpunk TCG has been giga funded, I think that maybe they can get some clout to have a digital client built. It'll still take a few years though. I don't think that they have a I don't think they have a stretch goal for digital client, right? Cuz you got to remember, the Kickstarter is literally just a storefront. This game was getting made regardless. There was no doubt. They don't need to kickstart this game. This is literally just a way for them to guarantee that the people who it's basically pre-ordering the game. Let's be real. There was no worry that this TCG wasn't going to get funded. This is literally just pre-ordering the base set and using Kickstarter as a way to make that a fulfillment where they have your shipping info and all that jazz, right? And that's why you can tack on the deck box and the dice and the play mats and yada yada. What I do like, however, is the stretch goals add to the swag that you get for pledging. So everybody's getting like a ton of sick-ass promos and everything. But I don't think a digital client was on this stretch goal at all, right? I hope it's good for a physical game, but TCGs in general, it's hard to get started. Unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon that had Legacy or Magic, most card games need to see people actually play it in person. They say unlike D&D, it's harder for card games. I agree for Necro. Having a good digital client allows players who just want to check out the game to actually build and try and play and practice the game and get comfortable with it before they go to their local game store and buy a bunch of cards and things like that. The current hype for Cyberpunk, the potential for a really robust competitive scene, might be enough of a draw to get people into it. They've already said that they want to commit to supporting local game stores that want to carry the game and run events for the game. And I would love to see them run a ton of Cyberpunk events where you go, sign up, you get like a starter deck, play a few rounds, get some booster packs, that sort of thing. They did it for Lorcana, they did it for Gundam, they did it for Riftbound, but those events tend to fill up very, very fast because people go there because they want to get like the promos and stuff. So if they could do like a once per customer thing, that would be pretty nice. Like if you can obviously are a new player, I don't know. Legends of Runeterra had it perfect, but Riftbound is still hard. Since Riot is a company that it doesn't sell for 5 years or even 6 years to return, it will fail. Well, the thing for Riftbound was just that they didn't print enough for their first couple drops. That was, I remember when that happened, when they did like when the game first came out, they didn't print nearly enough. And they said, oh, we weren't anticipating this much demand or this much hype around the game. We're going to print more. And it took forever for them to catch up with the demand. And that squeezes the market. And it means that newcomers are paying like triple market price, triple MSRP in order to even get into the game. And so for Cyberpunk, the initial wave of fulfillment is guaranteed to go towards people who backed the game, so you aren't getting scalped. And hopefully, the regional distribution that they're working with for local game stores will also keep those stores well stocked. And yeah, hopefully, like I say, that is a massive hurdle that Cyberpunk needs to overcome, is they need to overprint. I think they already said in one of their fighting TCG scarcity problems. When they posted this back in February, we talked about it on stream. That's what I mean. I already said that. Yeah. The reason they're doing Kickstarter is not just to evaluate the hype. It's also to guarantee that their initial printing will go into the hands of players and collectors and not just scalpers. This is from Weird Co. CD Projekt Red owns the IP of Cyberpunk, but they partnered with Weird Co. as the company that's actually designing the game and the cards. And I forget exactly what Weird Co. is known for. They've made some other games, but we love and appreciate all the incredible conversations you and the community have struck up since we revealed the Cyberpunk trading card game in December. Thank you for your energy and support. We've also heard loud and clear what the biggest concerns are, so we wanted to address one of those today: product scarcity. If cards are hard to get, they become extremely expensive on secondary markets, and many are left overpaying and underplaying. This is something we're actively working to avoid. Today, we want to talk plainly about it, and more importantly, how we're distributing Cyberpunk TCG to avoid those pitfalls from day one. I thought it was going to be based off the tabletop more so than the game. I guess, like, the IP as, like, the Cyberpunk 2077 CD Projekt Red RPG, where there are going to be characters from that. I don't know if Johnny Silverhand or whatever is actually in the game. I don't know if they're actually allowed to put Johnny Silverhand in the TCG. I don't know if they've properly licensed Keanu Reeves' likeness for that purpose. Did they already reveal the Johnny Silverhand card? Or at least the art for it? Huh. Cyberpunk TCG is being built with players and local game stores at its core, not artificial scarcity. Launching via Kickstarter lets us measure real player demand, print to meet it, make sure every day one backer gets access to the game at a fair price. That means no lottery systems, no racing bots, no player lockout. At the same time, we continue supporting local game stores with guaranteed allocation, guaranteed restocks, and a release schedule that prioritizes growing and maintaining healthy communities. Stores that invest in building play spaces and events shouldn't be left guessing if they'll even get their hands on product. This is their livelihood, and they deserve supply security. Finally, we promise transparency. Transparency. We'll be open with players and stores about how production, allocation, and organized play are handled, because trust is how a TCG survives long term. If you want a deeper dive into our full approach and philosophy on tackling this problem, we broke it all down here. More. Give me more. All right. The TCG community has never been more active and interested in new games. With such a large potential audience, we chose to launch on Kickstarter to get an accurate picture of player demand and guarantee that all players who want cards will receive them. There still will, of course, be people selling their Kickstarter rewards and their promos and all of that frame one. Because there's going to be the people who hold, of course, the actual collectors that just want to keep the stuff as a keepsake because they love Cyberpunk, they love Lucy. 3, the people who are going to sell immediately because they predict that that's when the hype is going to be the greatest. So we'll have to see. This TCG is a one-set pump and depth 100%. I know, right? Sell your Kickstarter beta boxes and promos immediately, chat. Yeah, we haven't seen Rebecca revealed yet. We've seen price gouging crop up often in the broader industry, stopping new players from picking up a game and preying on the established community. We refuse to let that happen in Cyberpunk TCG. Our goal is to make the game as accessible and long-lived as possible. Initial release through Kickstarter guarantees us the financial and productional ability to get every day one player or collector access to our product. Local game stores are the lifeblood of trading card games. They are where communities form, gather, and thrive. For retail distribution, our strategy is to partner with distributors in each region to responsibly allocate product. No need to submit orders to several distributors in hopes of receiving some percentage of your total needs. With a single distribution partner per region, ordering products will be much easier, and we at Weird Co have an easier way to manage supply via tight integration with our partners. So this is really cool as well. A lot of, if you remember when Lorcana came out, they massively short printed their base set. And as such, they had to prioritize fulfilling their larger commitments in contracts to big box stores like Best Buy, Target, and Walmart. I know that Target was basically the most consistent way to find Lorcana back when it first came out. And a lot of local game stores who said, yes, we want all of this. We were pre-ordering all of this. Send us as much as you can. They got shafted. They didn't get none. They got none or like a tenth of what they ordered, because when a game first drops and a game is at its most hype, that's when a card shop is going to be selling the most of its product and getting the most profit. And when they're able to sell based on raw volume and hype, they can sell at or near MSRP. If the card shop is forced to buy their booster boxes and starter decks and all that on the secondary market from scalpers, they have to mark it up even further so that they can make a profit. And they also are not able to mark that product down as time progresses, because they're just going to be eating this terrible, terrible cost in the long run. Again, this issue with the over-reliance on the LGS big box needs access to get the hype of the game, needs to sticks. That's a good question as well, Mad Wheels, is that if you wanted Lorcana, you wanted to play Riftbound, you wanted to play Gundam, and you can never find it at Target or Walmart, and you can only get it from a local card game shop or ordering it off the internet, is that good or bad? And Pokemon TCG is pretty much in that situation right now. That scalpers literally know the restocking schedules of all the stores like Best Buy and Walmart and Target, and are literally there ahead of when the distributor is there to restock the shelves, and they buy them out immediately. So if you want Pokemon cards, you have to go to a card shop anyway, because a card shop is more equipped to limit the product that they sell per customer. Whereas a store like Walmart or Target, they can put up a sign, but they can't hire an extra guy to stand there at the card counter and actually limit the product. And the cashiers can't argue with scalper after scalper of, no, go put that back on the shelf. I'm not allowed to sell that to you, right? A big box store isn't built to restrict what they sell the way a local smaller store can. Especially where everything is behind the counter and you say, give me that, and they hand it to you. And if you understand that the hype for a product is there, you don't necessarily need to sell it in a large store, especially when it comes to card games. Don't get me wrong. It would be like if you were selling a video game and you're like, oh, I only want to sell my video game in GameStop because I want to make sure only one per customer is sold. I don't want to put it in Walmart or Target where somebody might buy multiple copies and nobody can find it. Like, that doesn't make any sense, because TCGs are already a specified niche hobby. So you're going to go to that specified niche store to buy it. We're in self-checkout, checking out its lettuce anyways. Right? And I think that in the modern era, definitely, if you go back in time, just 3 years ago, if you weren't selling your card game in Walmart and Target and stuff, you were absolutely inting, because card games were also, it was like an impulse buy sort of thing, where you're near the cash register and you see a booster box, or your nephew, your kid is with you, and they're like, oh, they got Pokemon cards, I want Pokemon cards, right? You get them the starter deck or whatever. And it was kind of just a thing that you would sell. And we remember the era of just a whole decade of dusty Yu-Gi-Oh starter decks just in a pile at Walmart, and people would make videos of them going and buying these super outdated starter decks and trying to actually play them. Right? But in the modern era where the people who want card games know where to go, you are allowed to make it available through a specific channel and support those channels to meet the demand, rather than going for a wide distribution channel that is going to get, overtaken by scalpers, if that makes sense. In the future, I imagine that other shops are going to be like, yo, we want to carry your game. We want to carry Cyberpunk. Like if Walmart and Target are really scrambling. But it's the same thing with other games, right? Like Cookie Run, Weiss Schwartz, Gundam. These aren't the sort of games that you're going to be seeing in Target and Walmart. Walmart carries Lorcana, Pokemon, and One Piece on a good day. I can't remember the last time I saw One Piece or Pokemon in stock at a box store. I'm saying do both. I'm saying that when they're first starting out, I think this is the correct path to just sell specifically through local game stores, and eventually down the road, I think that they could sell stuff at box stores. Ideally, if I was marketing for a card game, I'm selling my booster boxes, all my accessories, my starter decks through local game stores, maybe through the main website direct. And then if I released like a 2-player starter set, like a head-to-head set where you and a friend want to try the game and you buy a sealed product that comes with like 2 decks and a handful of booster packs. So that way you can play against each other and upgrade your decks a little bit. That sealed product, I think that that's a really good fit for like Walmart and Target and everything like that, right? If I were marketing for a card game, I consider looking for another job because this one isn't going well. Bandai doesn't do big box for some reason. It depends. It definitely depends. Big box stores probably have some sort of agreement with One Piece, the IP in general, so maybe the card game is able to piggyback off of that. Same thing with like Disney. Like big box stores sell Disney merchandise and movies and stuff. So maybe selling the card game for those IPs that you're kind of already selling merch and whatnot of, maybe it's roped into that somehow. But then other IPs don't have that sort of direct established customer base within the customers of that big store. And it's kind of strange too, right? Like Costco does like Pokemon card drops, Magic the Gathering card drops, but I haven't seen like One Piece for sale at Costco. So these are all just deals that are figured out behind the scenes. Right? I've never seen Flesh and Blood, for example, for sale inside of a big box store. There are certain card games that are always sold exclusively and only through local card shops. And then those card shops will order some, and if they constantly have customers coming in and buying it, they're going to order more. If they don't have any and customers go in and ask about it, then they're going to order more. And again, by distributing through local game stores, they reduce the impact of scalpers because local game stores have a stronger lever to stop that behavior. Not necessarily stop that behavior, if we're being honest, right? If I'm running a local card game shop, it's maybe better for me in the long term, but if you're like a giga greedy capitalist, then you're going to sell it all to Johnny Scalper and, I cleared out my whole inventory, I made my money, and it's whatever. Right? Especially if it's like, oh, if you want to buy more than 2 booster boxes and you have to pay an extra fee on top or something, like there's definitely going to be card game stores that are going to be like, oh yeah, I'm partnered with Cyberpunk, and they're literally just using it as an extra step to funnel it all to Scalpy McScalper. I don't know. And I don't even know if there's any sort of facility or infrastructure to report that sort of behavior. It is what it is. I would recommend that if your local game store is price gouging you, or if they aren't making an effort to actually provide the cards to the local community and the players that support the shop and want to play events at the shop, then you just shouldn't support them. And I know that in certain places you don't have an option, and fucking capitalism. What can I say? So for the initial wave, I think this is the correct line for this modern era because it's gotten so bad. If this era of TCG scalping never occurred, we could probably see some wheeling and dealing with Cyberpunk trying to get just like selling in Best Buy or something like that, right? Best Buy is a little bit more electronics video gamey focused. And so, yeah, we sell PlayStation, we sell Cyberpunk 2077, we sell The Witcher. Everybody who shops at Best Buy knows who CD Projekt Red is. We sell Pokemon cards. It makes sense we would sell Cyberpunk and One Piece and Lorcana. Like, Best Buy is probably the most card game store, big box store there is out of the many other shops that would sell card games, or at least have a card game area by their checkout. And hopefully this works out where they have a robust network of card game stores and distributors, and they're able to actually keep up with the demand. Like, actually. Because I have only heard the horror stories. There are certain people like Cosmic, right? Cosmic Makes Plays, you remember him? Who evaluates card game markets and knows about how this stuff goes down on the back end and how card games will place big orders and only get a portion of what they ordered. So then they're trying to do their best to stretch it or limit and make sure that all their players and customers are satisfied. Because if I order 10 boxes of Cyberpunk TCG and I can sell all 10 boxes to one guy, I'm still making the same amount of money than if I sold all the boxes to individual people. But the second option is better for my business in the long run in terms of customer satisfaction. Like, you piss off one guy who can't buy 10 cases at once, but you're able to spread that out amongst more customers, and then you get more repeat customers, etc. Rather than trying to cash it all in on just one big guy and say, okay, well, nope, all this product's your problem now. I mean, Flesh and Blood is something I see no one play or even talk about. Flesh and Blood was designed specifically to be very niche and very sweaty. I see the cards for sale, but I don't know anything about the game. Because Flesh and Blood, when it came out, it specifically released at the perfect window when Magic the Gathering Pro Play imploded. And so all of those hardcore Magic the Gathering players were looking for a new game to pivot to. And they're like, we don't want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! We don't want to play Pokemon. One Piece wasn't out yet, or at least it hadn't taken off. One Piece is huge now, but I remember when One Piece came out, the game was very popular, but it was ironic because One Piece TCG was popular, but it was really hard to find cards. And when you found the cards, they were super cheap. It was very cheap to actually get into the One Piece TCG for a while there. Up until like their first like 4 sets, it was just really hard to find cards. Nobody was carrying it. And then it started to become like, it started to creep up into the big 3 discussion. To see if want people sure kickstart, but some people kickstarter just to kickstart. Doesn't mean the demand is there. But I hope TCG physically continues to thrive, but it's so hard to see the market growth in terms of brick and mortar stores. That's a really good point for Necro, because I talked about that at the top of the stream, is that even though this Kickstarter is the most funded Kickstarter in history or whatever, the most funded game in history, this does not, oh my God, it's going up. This does not translate to longevity for the game. This does not translate to guaranteed success for the game. This is just everybody who wants to get the cards when they first come out. And they'll have to see if the game is actually good, right? You have to be able to find, the game has to be good, and you have to be able to find cards, and the cards have to be a reasonable price. Those are the 3 points that a game needs to hit. And the meta needs to be good. Sometimes a game can be good, but the meta is bad, right? So there's kind of 4 points. Available cards for cheap, good game, good meta game. Very hard to nail all 4, but you have to get close to nailing at least 3.5 of them. Because you can have good game, good meta, cards are available, but they're really expensive. Some would argue that's Yu-Gi-Oh! And then there's game is, cards are, the meta's good, the cards are cheap, but they're hard to find, and they're inexpensive. That's Pokemon. And Magic the Gathering is, the game is good, the meta's trash, the cards are expensive, but the cards are easy to find. So it's like these 4 points in different distribution becomes every card game. So it's not just that Cyberpunk needs to have a good Kickstarter and then the cards come out and people play with the cards. It's like there needs to be fucking tournaments like Frame 1. We need to see broadcasted tournaments. We need to see good local leagues. Like, they need to start talking about this now. We need card shops that are being allocated distributed product guaranteed from the Kickstarter to also be talking right now about we are running local leagues and tournaments and organized play on this date. The game drops Q4. You better be here in October. Game is good is debatable for MTG. Yeah, when I say game is good, I mean that people have fun playing it, specifically like Commander is all I hear about these days for Magic the Gathering, is that everybody loves playing Commander. So yeah, game is fun there's a little bit of overlap with game is good. Game is good / fun. How many card shops will be open before then? That's a good question, right? Like, a lot of local card shops are literally suffering because they can't get cards, or what cards they get, they're selling at double MSRP and pissing off their customer base. There could be some horrible catastrophe between now and the release of Cyberpunk where a ton of card shops close down. Yeah, really good Cyberpunk discussion today. I talked about how Dying Night is insanely good. I think this is still one of the best cards in the game, where you're able to remove a rival gear when you attack so your opponent's not able to stop you. And Mad Wheels earlier was saying that Floret was super bad. Return a spent unit with cost 4 or less to its owner's hand. I think that this is secretly, this is a card that's going to be probably super strong at first, and then will fall off as players learn to play around this. Where if a unit costs 4 or less, you aren't going to be putting a bunch of gear on it and going tall on a unit that's just going to get nailed by Floret. Blue decks probably still want to run 1 copy of this card, just because if you're in a matchup or a situation where your opponent is going tall on a cheapo unit or an archetype that does that, you have to Floret. And if not, you can just sell it. Probably 2 copies of Floret in that case. This could be good, honestly, in like a really aggressive deck too. Because if the unit costs 4 and you spend 3 to send it back to their hand, they have to spend that 4 again to put it back into play. So if you're really far ahead on tempo, the Floret allows you to keep your aggression going, right? You Floret again with Evelyn Parker, where you're using Floret to remove a big target from play or a blocker. And then Evelyn Parker goes in and steals gigs. And then when your opponent's trying to crack back on you, you're drawing more cards. I think that this is not insane, but this will feel very oppressive in matches where tempo is going to be king. And because of the inevitability of Cyberpunk, tempo is already going to be very pronounced. This is also only 2 RAM. Blue, red, red, or even blue, red, green tempo could be something. Because you also get access to corporate surveillance to get around blockers in green. Evaluating RAM costs is going to be very, very important. And we don't even have the full card pool yet. No, like, for real, I think blue, red, green might be super good. Or even like blue, yellow, green, something like that. Tricolor, I could see. Honestly, blue, red, green, because then you get Goro. Yellow just lets you run River Ward to get some extra card draw. But red also gives you some card draw with Arasaka or like Satori. We'll have to see what the rest of the base set card pool looks like. But blue, red, green is going to be an archetype I'm going to have my eyes on. And what did I say earlier? Red, yellow, 3s. Because this card is, there's no way this card isn't broken. With the right build, honestly, not even with the right build, just a build. Because you get to choose, you get to reveal and then choose the gig. Getting the gig to read 2 or 3 is going to be the hardest part about actually playing this card. And so you and your opponent must both low roll in order for this card to be bad. Because you start the game off with a D4 and a D6, and your opponent's going to start off with a D4 and a D6. Even the like any die you roll could roll a 2 or a 3, but of course with the D4 and the D6, the higher chance is there. Maybe that's what's going to happen is people are going to be running Hanako, and then in those rare games where neither player rolls a 2 or a 3 on their opening turns, then you're bodied. But to be fair, that just means that you rolled a 1, a 4, or a 5, and you're still looking at the top 4 cards and maybe looking for 4 drops or something instead. Then you have high street cred, and you're filtering specifically for a card, right? Oh, I really want this really broken 4 drop. So you just go Hanako, look at the top 4. If you hit the 4 drop, then you pick your 4. The fact that you can see the cards and then pick the dice means that it's like I'm struggling to find a play or an instance where that card is bad. There is a world where you get all duds, definitely. But any deck that's built with a completely normal human curve, you're going to find a card to use, right? Like, let's be for real. 2 or 3 is the high roll. With my build, I plan on 3 being the ultimate high roll. 3 is plan 1. 2 is plan B, plan A, plan B. And then plan C is, okay, well, I'll just roll, I'll look for 1s, and then I'll just have a bunch of cheap gear to sell and just focus on my curve. Or I'm looking for 4s, so I can just play 1 big guy or something, right? Like emergency, I'm not in green, but you know what I mean. We don't even know the rest of the card pool yet. So depending on what the rest of the curve of this game looks like in the base set, Hanako just gets better and better the more cards they add. And there's worlds where your Hanakos are all in the middle of the deck, and then it's the late-ish game. You've got a ton of gig dice in play. What's the other card I wanted to run? Maybe Armored Minotaur, where if you've got a 6 that you rolled on your D6 or your D10, and so you're just like, well, it's in the late game, I need my big guy, and so I'm basically looking at the top 4 cards to try to find an Armored Minotaur. And if you have a gig dice that reads 6, so that becomes a valid choice, the chance of you actually having 12 street cred is perhaps quite high. I'm definitely making it seem like this card is much easier to pull off than it is, but I think that this card is also easier to pull off than it looks. With the right deck build, get your gig dice set up, the way that this bleeds into itself, where if you roll a 3 on your D4 or your D6, or anything really, or if your opponent does and you steal that gig dice, and then you Hanako for 3, and you get another copy of Hanako, and you add 3 cards to your hand, 2 or 3 cards, a Hanako and a T-Bug, or Hanako and a Muscle, you're just insane. More in the sense of it getting better with each card added until it becomes just too much. Yeah, this gets to a point where your curve is so solid. For honestly, for like an aggressive deck that's mostly ones and twos or anything like that, this card is just ridiculous.